Okay, really sorry about the audio on that last one. I think I've got things under control this time. We should be okay. Um, so last time we introduced JavaScript in general. It's a very similar language in its basics to PHP. Well, one thing that we did introduce was the idea of functions, which you should be familiar with because it's the same as methods from Java or the def keyword in PHP. Sorry, in Python. But what we're going to do now is we are going to introduce something that's really unusual, or maybe you haven't seen before, about JavaScript functions, and it's really key. It's kind of a weird concept, and usually in an intro course you would stay away from strange concepts, except that it's really fundamental to the way that we're going to write code in JavaScript. So we need to explain to you, I need to explain to you what functions really are in JavaScript, because it's different from what functions really are in PHP and what methods really are in Java. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I've got a couple of pre-baked files here, or I've just gotten them ready. This is just functions.html I made it from the template, and I've linked it with a script tab to functions.js. Okay, so I'm going to load this up, and last video I was going through XAMPP always. So last video I was always going, localhost / I think it's basic.js, and here's my functions.html, and then we're looking at the console over here, and when we when we view page source, we can go here and we can view functions.js as well. So functions.js is empty. Functions.html just links to it. It's basically, everything's basically empty and ready to go. And it's all being loaded through localhost. But I did want to point out to you, because we needed localhost for PHP, and we'll need it again next module, but we don't actually need it this module. So as long as you promise not to get too used to it, you could open something like functions.html just by double clicking it. And if you see the difference up here, it's just, here Chrome is just asking the operating system for this file, and it's given it a Windows file address. Whereas here, it's asking the operating system to send a message to the computer named localhost, which happens to be our computer. So it sends out that message, which loops back to our computer. It sees it's coming in at port 80. The firewall decides whether to allow that request in, and then if it does, the operating system figures out that port 80 is being used by XAMPP, hands the request to XAMPP that replies. So it's a whole thing that goes on this way when we're going through a URL, which doesn't happen when we go this way. So if you tried to open a PHP file like this, it wouldn't work. It would just show you the code. But because JavaScript code is executed in the browser and there's no PHP in what we're doing this module, we can open them this way as well. But I'm going to continue going through the XAMPP server. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the console here, and I just want to create a function. Just call it hello with a parameter x, and I can do this all in the console. And then I'll just go console.log x, like that, or maybe hello space plus x. There we go. By the way, you might notice I didn't do this on purpose, but I forgot the semicolon there. Semicolons are actually optional in most places in JavaScript, but not everywhere. So you can actually leave out semicolons and most of your code will work. You'll get caught if you try and leave out a semicolon before an else, and there might be one or two other places. It's generally considered best practice to put the semicolons in, but I accidentally left it out this time, and it's still going to work. So I can say hello Sam, like that, and it says hello Sam. I can also call hello with no arguments, and it'll say hello undefined. It'll give the special value undefined to the argument x. And I could also pass it with an extra argument, which would just get ignored. So we covered all that stuff last time. Because I have no return value, it's returning the special value undefined here. So that's a special value. I also did this last time. I just typed hello, and you can see it answers like this. It answers with this weird notation, which means that hello is currently holding, the name hello is currently holding a function. So I can go x equals 5 and then say what's x, and it says 5. I can define a function like I did up here and then say what's hello, and it's a function. This is something you can't do in other languages. It speaks to a deep difference between JavaScript and other languages. And that difference is that there is no distinction made in JavaScript between variable names and function names. Another way to put it is that a function name is just a variable name that happens to hold a function value. So functions are values that you can pass around, just like 5 is an integer value. A function is a value of type function that you can pass around. So right now, for example, x is set to the number 5, but I could set it to be the same thing as hello, and now x is a function, and I can call it like that. Okay, hello similarly is currently a function, which I can call like this, but I could then later on set it to just be a string. And now hello is not a function anymore, and if I try to call hello, I'll get an error, whereas I can still call x. X now has the function value. So functions and variables the names are the same. The names are equivalent. And there's a lot of knock-on effects that this causes. So let's go take a look at the module guide here, where I'm walking you through this. What I'm showing you here is another way to define a function that's equivalent in most cases, but not everywhere, to the regular way of defining a function. So let me show you this in functions.js. So I can go function foo1 a and say return a times 2. So there's a function that just doubles. Let's call it double. Okay. So there's a function that returns the double of whatever you gave it. Here's another way to define a very similar function. I'll call this one triple. Triple equals function a return a times 3. And this technically needs a semicolon at the end. So what this is this is a variable declaration. It's just like saying let x equals 5, like that. I'm saying let the name triple equal a function. And this thing over here is called an anonymous function. You notice it's very similar to this, except there's no name here. Instead of putting the name here, I left it anonymous. So this is what's called anonymous, which means no name. So an anonymous function which is assigned to the name triple. And this, now I can call this function just like I could call double. So let's go take a look at where I'm running this stuff here. I'm going to reload it. I should have a function called double and a function called triple, like that. And they can both be called. Oops. Double 2 is 4, and triple 2 should be 6, because it returns a times 3. So that really brings it home that the name of a function really, honestly, no kidding, is a variable name. And the value stored in that variable is a function value. And that's why we need the semicolon here, because we're at the end of a let statement, even though there's this block of code in the middle of our let statement. Okay. Anonymous functions are also sometimes referred to as function literals. So a function literal. Literal means a value that's typed directly into a program. So if you go back here, 5 is an integer literal. And over here, the anonymous function, the whole thing is a function literal. So it's a value that's just typed directly in to be used and then discarded afterwards. Okay, so that's a really important fact about JavaScript. And okay, so again, just to repeat, functions are just variables. Function names are just variable names, and a function is a type that you can assign to a variable name. And you can create these anonymous functions, which are just pure function values, and you can assign them to variables. So it's pretty cool. It's a very different, if you've never been introduced to this way of thinking about programming before, it's kind of very different, it kind of mind expanding. You know, Java makes a big distinction between the name of a method and the name of a variable. If you have a method named foo, you can't then reassign it to be a variable, and you can't pass it as a parameter, and you can't have a local method. So method names are in a different category from variable names. But then the question is why? Why are they in a different category? Why not allow them to be the same kind of name? And then you can, it opens up all kinds of interesting stuff, which we're about to talk about. So one thing that is a result of this fact about JavaScript is that you can have a function within a function. So I can say, okay, I'm going to have a function called outer, which takes a parameter x. And then inside that function, I'm going to declare another function I'll call this one inner, which takes a parameter y, and it returns y to the power of 2. I think that, does that work in JavaScript? I think you can do that in JavaScript. I might be wrong. Okay, so now what I have is I have a function called inner, which is accessible inside this function, inside this block, but not accessible outside of it. So this is a local variable, just like if I say let y equals 10, that y is a local variable of this function. This is a local variable also. Inner is a local variable. And remember, I could always do it like this, let inner equal function. That's equivalent to the other way that I did it. So I've created two local variables here, one called y, one called inner. Inner happens to store a function. Maybe I should call this z, so that it's different from the y here. And that function has a local variable called y inside of it as well. So now I could do something like this, return x times z times inner x. What's that going to do? Alt-Shift-F. So if I pass in 2 to outer, it's going to return 2 times 10 times whatever this is. I'm passing the 2 into y, so 2 squared is 4. So it's going to be 2 times 10 times 4, which should be 80. So let's see if that works. So I'm going to call out the function outer with the value 2. So outer, there it is, it's a function. Outer 2 should return, oh no, it returns 0, y. Oh, there we go. Oh, I know why, because 2 to the power 2, yeah. This is not, yeah. Does JavaScript have, oh it does, it has the double star, just like Python. This used to be in use in some languages for exponents. In JavaScript it's actually doing a bitwise exclusive OR, I think, which results in 0. Anything, yeah, it's a bitwise exclusive OR. You can look that up if you want. So don't do that, do this instead. So now if I pass in outer 2, there we go, it's 80. So how did that work? Well, x is 2, z is 10, and when I call inner x, it takes the value 2 and passes it into y. It returns 2 squared, which is 4. So this becomes 2 times 10 times 4. And now outer is accessible because it's a global variable. I defined it outside of any other context. X, which is its x, we do have an x because I have a global variable called x that I had previously defined, but this is a local variable x that I can't access. Y I can't access, and inner I can't access. I can't call the inner function myself because it's a local function of that outer function. So that's kind of interesting. You might think, why would I ever want to do that? Well, sometimes it makes sense within a function to have helper functions, but as you'll see when we get to it, we're going to do this all the time, functions inside of functions. And I'll leave that as a little teaser for next time, for when we get there, which will be next week. All right, let's go back to the Module 3 guide. So here's an example of an inner and an outer function. This one's a bit more complicated than the one that I made. Here's another thing that you can do, another thing that we're going to do all the time. We're going to pass functions as arguments. Since functions are just variables, you can use them anywhere you would use a normal variable, which means that if you're calling a function, you can give it another function as an argument. So here's an example. Let's create one here. Function, I'll do the example given there. I want the first parameter to be a function and the second parameter to be an argument, and then I'm just going to call the function with the argument and return the value. Okay, so I've got this, up here I've got this double function, for example. I could pass double here and 5 here, and it would take double and call it using the 5 and return 10 to me. Do something well. Okay, so let's try that. Do something, double, 5. Boom, 10. Do something, triple, 5, 15. Now this is really key to how event-driven programming is going to work in JavaScript. We are going to be able to attach In Java and object-oriented languages, they've got some syntactic sugar in there now that makes it look like you can do this. But in reality, when you want to attach an event listener to something, like say you want a mouse click event listener, a method that does something when they click the mouse, you have to, in the background anyway, Java creates a whole object out of a class and passes that object as the listener. Here we're going to be able to pass just a function, so it's a much kind of neater way of doing things. There's other things you can do as well. Let me show you the set interval function. So this is an example of a function, set interval, that requires two parameters. So I can say double, I can call, wait, what's a function I could call? Let's go back and take a look here. I need a function that just does something. So let's do function hello console.log. Hi. Okay, so now I have a simple little function called hello. Let's reload it over here. So I have this simple little function called hello. If I want to call it, I have to put the round brackets on it, and it's going to write the word hi to the console. That's what it does. Set timeout takes two parameters. The first one is a function, and the second one is a time in milliseconds. So if I say 1,000, that's 1 second. So this function here is called a callback function. What it's going to do is set timeout is going to wait 1 second and then call the function hello. So it waits for a second and then it says hi. If I do it again, it waits and then it says hi. Set timeout is returning an ID for this timeout. There's a very similar function called set interval. So I can say hello and let's pass it 500 milliseconds. And it's going to say hi every 500 milliseconds. Now the console here breaks them up. So if I do something like, just say X here, it's set it 17 times, once per 500 milliseconds, per half a second, and now it's saying it again. You may notice that set interval returned a value here, 3. If I want to stop this, I can say clear interval and use that value 3, and that will stop the interval from going. So what you can do is when you can use this to create animations and stuff. Once we start changing things that are part of the page, we can say, let ID equals set interval hello, comma, I don't know, 100 milliseconds. So it's going to call it 10 times per second. And boom, off it goes. 10 times a second, it's calling hi. And when I want to stop it, I can say clear interval. And I put the variable ID here. So it's stored the ID of this particular timer, and that will stop the timer. So pretty cool. So there's an example of when you want to do a timing effect, like you want the user, sometimes when sites open big menus, when the user leaves the menu, they wait for half a second or so before they close the menu up. You can do that with set interval. If you want to make things move around the screen, you can do it with set timeout, sorry. If you want to move things around the screen, you can do that with set interval. So we'll get to that. Okay, where are we at? Oh yeah, there is something else I wanted to show you because we'll see this a lot as well. So down here is where we get to set timeout and set interval. And there's a link there where you can look for more info on these functions. I did want to show you this example here. Let me just copy and paste this into the console here. It's going to let me do it. I have to hold on for a second because my disk drive is getting ready. There we go. So what am I doing here? Do something. So if you remember my do something function, it requires a function parameter for the first argument, a function for the first argument, and some other value to pass to the function for the second argument. Here, instead of creating the function and then passing it by name, I've typed the entire function into the parameter list. So this can be confusing when you're looking at it for the first time, but everything up to this first comma here is the first argument to the do something function, and I've passed in an anonymous function. So I'm passing in a function which takes a parameter x and then returns a random number between 0 and x minus 1. And then I'm passing in 34 as the second argument to do something. So the f in do something is becoming this, and a is becoming 34. There we go, and it gets me a random function like that. Similarly with set interval, I could create a function in there, console.log hi, like that, semicolon. Do that every 2 seconds, like that. So I'm passing a function literal here as an argument. So I'm not even giving it a name. I'm just passing in this anonymous function. And every 2 seconds, it should say hi. There it goes, saying hi every 2 seconds. Okay, that's something that we're going to be doing a lot as well. So let me give you an example. It's called do something in here. Oh, actually, I'll just paste it. Alt-Shift-F. When I hit Alt-Shift-F, you see what it does here? This is the weird syntax that you're going to have to get used to, because we're going to see this a lot. This thing here is a function declaration, a function creation, a function literal, which is happening inside of the parameter list of do something. And then this is the second parameter being passed. So we're going to see this all the time. We're going to see this, a function inside another function, all the time. So it's important, I think, to understand what is going on when we put a function inside of a function, and what is going on when we pass a function as a parameter like this, so that you're not just memorizing the syntax, but you're understanding what's going on deep in the guts of the language. And what's going on is that functions are values. Functions, even though they're code, they're just values that can be passed around and assigned to variables. And that opens up this whole kind of, can of worms of cool things that you can do with functions. Okay, I think that's everything. Next video, we're going to talk about the document object model. That's really important too. All this stuff is foundational. And in the document object model, we'll actually, start doing things so that instead of just giving us output in the console, they're actually going to change things that are on the web page. So that's kind of the next step. In the meantime, I would like you to try at least exercise 1 here. At least exercise 2. So it says create 2 JavaScript functions called heads and tails using the let syntax. So let let heads equal function bracket, and the heads one just outputs heads and the tails one just outputs tails. And then I want you to create a JavaScript function. It's going to be similar to do something. It's going to be called random function, but it accepts 2 functions and then a number between 0 and 1. If the number is less than 0.5, it calls the first function, and if the number is greater, it calls the other function. So then I'm going to get you to test your random function by passing heads and tails as the 2 functions arguments, and the third argument should be math.random, which will give you a random number between 0 and 1. So about half the time it should call heads, and the other half it should call tails. And then if you want to try out some timing functions, try some of the stuff in exercise 3 here. So give some of these a try, and then when you've gotten comfortable with defining functions and using them in JavaScript, we can get into the document object model. So remember that to do this, you're going to need an HTML file, and you can either just put a script element in it, or you can have the script element load a JavaScript file, and you can put your stuff there. Okay, so that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to get things changing inside of web pages, and that's going to be cool.